This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Joining me today for a cup of coffee are two returning guests and two of my very favorite people in Star Wars fandom. First, the director and creator of Looking for Leia, Dr. Annalise Ophelian.
Hey, Dan.
How are you?
I'm so good. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it is great to be back. You and I of course, you've been on the show before, but we got to hang out a little bit at Comic-Con, I believe 2 years ago, and then we chatted naturally at Celebration, and hopefully we'll see you this year at Celebration too, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. No, I've got my tickets. I'm super excited to be going, and it's always lovely when you get to meet people in real life that you've had the podcasting and online conversations with. So I look forward to seeing you there as well. You hosted that amazing podcaster gathering in Chicago that was like possibly the most fun evening I've had at a con ever. So good times, really good times.
Well, thank you, man. That was a great night. We will definitely have something like that in August. So thank you for bringing that up. Also returning to the show, the co-host of Idiots Array and a longtime friend and contributor to Coffee with Kenobi, Ryder Waldron.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. I love listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I love being on here with you. So thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be on with you, Annalise. This is awesome.
And I should probably have said Dr. Ryder Waldron, since you are my favorite Star Wars dentist.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yes.
Usually one of the most hated men in the galaxy for my profession, but it's okay. That's what I chose.
Right.
Who hates a dentist, Ryder? Who hates a dentist?
Like 98% of the people on planet Earth, I think.
Well, they should just brush, and then they wouldn't hate you.
Just brush and floss. Come on.
That's right. How hard is it? Come on. All right, so this is a great show to talk about. We are returning to The Mandalorian. We had a bit of a month off of reviewing The Mandalorian, even though The Mandalorian and Disney Plus didn't stop because of the rise of the Resistance on both coasts. And, of course, a little movie called The Rise of Skywalker. So we're back to the standard format, and this is a 6th episode. It is entitled The Prisoner. And what we usually do is we give an overall kind of a thoughts on the episode and give it a letter grade, and then we spend the rest of the show defending the grade that we have given it. So, Annalise, let's start with you. What are your overall thoughts on this episode, and what grade would you give it?
Well, I love this episode. So, I love The Mandalorian as a whole series, but this episode really strummed some special chords for me. So this is actually like a solid A episode for me. On so many levels, it was a bit of a departure episode. It was its own kind of standalone adventure episode, which I know some folks didn't love as much as the really central plot forward. We're pushing the overarching season plot forward. This was much more of we're going to get into the character developments. It had some amazing callbacks to some of my favorite elements of Star Wars, right? We had like everything from original trilogy, prequels, standalone films, a lot of my favorite moments just in like other genre. I have, in fact, most of my kind of notes on the episode had to do with like all the other genre, franchise sort of reference points that it brought up for me. It was a really entertaining and really satisfying episode for me.
You know what? That makes me so happy. And, I'll just take a quick detour to say, I know that people sometimes have mixed reactions to different things in the Star Wars universe, but I like that there is differences in opinion. I like when people like things. I like when people don't like them, as long as you can articulate them and just have some fun with it. And it sounds like, Annalise, this episode was just pure fun for you. And I love that it's hitting all those notes too.
Here. Yeah, that's it. And again, like I really appreciate this point as well, that there's, there's a part of this that we can talk about. Maybe the more objective qualities of, like the cinematography in this episode was like really solid. Barry Dwan, who's who's the second unit DP on Rogue One, shot a good portion of The Mandalorian. Like, I think this is some like on a cinematic level, like on that television cinematic level, really strong stuff. We can break things down, but at the end of the day, it's also like, how are we personally connecting with it? One of the things that's great about Star Wars is there's so much to connect with, that if a thing isn't your jam, that's okay. And there will be other things that are. So I appreciate the folks for whom this was not their jam. It was definitely mine, and I'm excited to talk about the things I found fun about it.
So before we get to Ryder's thoughts, I do want to point out that when I rewatched this for tonight's episode, I specifically thought of you, and it was just very fortuitous because some of the camera stuff and some of the ways that they present certain shots. I mean, you're the perfect person to talk about it. So I can't wait to get into that for sure.
Excellent.
Ryder, what about you? What were your overall thoughts on this one, and what letter grade would you give it?
So I would probably give it an A-, and I love this episode. Just like Annalise said, it ran a range of emotions for me, from me hating some of these supporting characters because they were written so well and they were just people that would just totally bug me in real life, to it did feel more like a standalone episode, but it was good. I don't need every episode to be pushing the full story along. I'm fine with these kind of standalone episodes, but it did push his character along a lot. It made me happy. It made me sad. It made me frustrated. I watched it with my son, who was 7, for the first time, or I watched it, for the first time with him. And it just made me happy because it made him so happy. And I just love that Star Wars does that. I love what The Mandalorian is doing with it. And I had a lot of fun with this episode, and it was just very well done. I liked all the fun cameos that were in there. I liked the some of the big actors that are playing supporting roles in it, and it was a good solid episode, and it showed some of the humanity of the Mandalorian. If we hadn't seen enough of that already, it just kind of pushed that even further along.
Well, that's kind of on the pulse of where I'm at with this, because there's such a dramatic juxtaposition between the Mandalorian and this foursome, this lethal foursome. And so, full disclosure, the first time I watched this episode was, of course, when it premiered, like all of us, and I just didn't like it. It just left a bad taste in my mouth. It had the tone that I feared the entire series would have. I thought it was going to be very much like the rumored live-action Underworld stuff, and all the characters were so disturbing to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is just so dark. And so I really wrestled with it. And so then we table it, and then I talked to the both of you, and it's time to do this one. So I watched it again, and I loved it. I had such a drastic paradigm shift in my evaluation of it. And honestly, I think it's because I knew what was going to happen, so I could take a breath and not be anxious for the Mandalorian and the child's safety. I really think that's a big part of it, because the way that this episode is directed, you feel legitimate peril for everybody you care about. And like you just said, Ryder, it very much gives the Mandalorian a chance to shine. And as you said, Annalise, it's very much a character study. I think it's fair to say that of these 8 episodes, 3 of them probably are just character study episodes that don't necessarily advance the plot, but they do things that are important because we get to see what's underneath that mask. I still maintain that Pedro Pascal's acting is almost revolutionary. I try not to be too hyperbolic, because the way he carries himself and tilts his head and emotes without us seeing his eyes tells us a world about this. And Annalise, as a filmmaker, you must be completely enamored with this.
Oh, yeah. And this episode, because I was rewatching before the podcast, and, I agree with you fully. I felt this way about Pedro Pascal this whole season. But this episode, on just like a headcocks alone level, the subtlety and the physical, this is mime, right? At its like highest level. Because they also give him something to do in this episode that they've held back on in previous episodes. And I think it's actually one of the great strengths of the series is that a more sort of like Michael Bay approach to this story would have had us getting the like full, blasters blazing, I'm just going to fight all the time Mandalorian lead figure through every episode for, the entire season. And of course, what's so compelling about this character is that he is a man of few words, and that he's got this kind of stoicism, and that we didn't, I think, before this episode, get the chance to really see him open up. In terms of his fighting ability, right? And we even get that kind of, when Berg is sort of like, I thought y'all were supposed to be sort of like, these big bad warriors, that we haven't seen him really show us what he's working with. And so like on a fight choreography level, the physicality of those fights, which I adore, but then also like I was noticing on the second rewatch, during the taking of the command center where Sky Guy in IRL thinking about Ryder's like, awesome. Yes, the casting in this episode were amazing. So, in my mind, I'm like, Anakin Skywalker is working in the like control center, but Matt Latner is in there. And there's this tiny little head nod that he gives him, right? Which is just this like, look at me. I'm the one of the group of us that's going to like have your back, do the thing I'm telling you to do. And it's just like a microsecond, but you completely see what the character's position in that conflict is through that little micro movement. And the whole performance, his whole performance throughout this whole episode is just filled with those, and it's delicious.
It's amazing too that in that moment in which he is able to create this atmosphere where you actually feel safe as long as he's there. And it's just the way he's delivering these lines. There's so much. Ryder, we meet these characters. As I said, I didn't give a grade. I think when I initially saw this, I probably would have given it a C- or a D+. But now I'd definitely give it a solid A, which I'm so stunned that I feel that way. But I think that shows the merit in rewatching, rereading, re-examining things, because we have different points of view that come with your subconscious, working on them, with talking with your friends and family. I think it's a wonderful thing. But this family that they have, this dysfunctional family, is certainly not the typical family you want to have Thanksgiving with. Ryder, talk to me about these four. Now we have Mayfield, who is the leader, former Imperial sharpshooter. We have Berg, who is the muscle, voiced or played by Clancy Evans, which was really, really cool. Still think he has one of the best Lex Luthors in that Justice League series. He is a Deveronian. We've got Zero, who is the droid, and then is it Shi Young? Is that how you say her name? Yeah, and she is the Twi'lek, and she is fearsome. She is frightening. Talk about these four.
Well, yeah, like I said, they're the people I would not hang out with. They're kind of in the Mandalorian's personal space. They've been invited into his ship, and it's kind of like the friends you invite over and they kind of trash your house and don't clean up after themselves, and they want to watch whatever they want to watch on TV. And it just like it was so well written, these characters, that they just drove me crazy. I just wanted to tell him to stop touching stuff, and don't try to take his helmet off. Don't touch the child. Just stop. And I found myself like getting like irritated with these characters because they just couldn't help themselves. And that's one of the things that really first struck me when I watched this episode. And I was like you, Dan, that I didn't love it the first time I watched it. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think it was great. And then with a rewatch and knowing what was going to happen and everything, I could settle in a little more. But that's how I felt about those characters at first. But they were so well done, and they really got to me when I watched this. And I just figure that's good writing, I guess. I don't know anything about that, but it just was well done with these characters.
Well, I think that my initial visceral reaction to this episode, it has to be good writing and it has to be good acting, because you're definitely supposed to find these characters despicable.
Yeah.
But there is something that they kind of create. Annalise, you mentioned to me both before we recorded tonight and then, of course, at the top of the show, how much this one spoke to you. Is a lot of this episode just kind of the interesting contrast with with this not so fantastic foursome?
Well, I think so. I love series television, right? And yes. One of the things I'm loving about getting to have Star Wars live action series, and I'm a big fan of the animation, so I've watched all of the animation, and certainly that took care of a lot of my that sort of itch for episodic Star Wars content, and also is totally different because it's sort of skewed for slightly different age groups. And so this is the first time in my life that I'm finally getting this, the format that I love and the content that I love. And one of the things I love the most about a sort of genre-based series format show is that built into it are these episodes that are less about how are we moving forward and more about how are we looking in and establishing stuff. So I'm a big Star Trek fan, and in all of the various Trek franchises, you will get these standalone episodes in which we're really going to get into Data's backstory. We're really going to just kind of like delve into a character and let you see how they handle a conflict or a situation, and you're going to come out the other side of it feeling closer to the character. And so I think we were all really like rooting for the Mandalorian. He's a really compelling and appealing character. They don't have to like sell us on him, but giving him these incredibly like complex, shady former colleagues, right? Like his whole kind of exchange with Ran at the very top of the episode, that he's clearly got like an ex sort of fling situation with Xi'an, and Quinn, her brother, who they're like on, we find out they're on a mission to Spring. All of those notes to me pluck the cord of that kind of closet morality of thieves, which is one of my favorite, kind of, again, tropes in genre. And so I love the pacing of this episode. I love the character development. And you're both right that, like, I think that that's a huge amount of that is writing. I think a lot of that is Rick Famuyiwa's direction. And he is really, like, one of my favorite directors. I love seeing what he's doing with this format. That tension and that push forward, right? Like, it's got a kind of Prison Break heist energy to it. It's got this ensemble action going on for it. But also in the middle of all of that, there's this part of me that's like, okay, but what's going on with Baby Yoda? Which I wonder, Dan, if the fact that, they dropped Baby Yoda pretty early on isn't a thing that might have sort of broken like that. There's those moments where you're like, I don't know if I trust this episode anymore. I don't know if I can hang with this because you dropped Baby Yoda.
Right. That's exactly what it is. That's and I just think, I mean, my youngest is 6 now, but it wasn't that far away that he was little. So I find myself so much more sensitive to that sort of a thing. And, that's pretty dark stuff. Heck, once we talk about the 8th episode, oh my goodness. But
I watched that episode with my mother and she screamed, and it wasn't like fancy screaming. She was like disturbed and we had to like pause and have a little moment. Like, it's really, it's intense.
It really is. And I was trying to explain to my, okay, we'll table that.
That's episode 8 though.
That's episode 8. Yeah. Not that we've seen that one yet. Episode 6 though. Yeah. That creates an interesting peril. Sporadically in this series, we've seen the child in jeopardy, but just I think what's darker to me is not that the child was almost dropped, because you could tell that was just to see how the Mandalorian would react, but more that someone would use that ploy to try to psychologically harm someone or to intimidate someone. That's a level of darkness we haven't seen a lot of, at least on a regular basis in Star Wars. And Annalise, why do you think they chose this? Was it purely just to show how dangerous these characters were, or is there something more to it?
I mean, from a psychological perspective, I think there's something really interesting this episode does, because and it actually does a few things. We've established that the Mandalorian as a character, like Mando as a character, is he's on the fringe, on the outskirts, literally the outer rim of this galaxy, that we're in a kind of lawless time. And up until this point, his contacts have all been with these kind of, ex-imperial overlords. And he himself is certainly the member of a guild, certainly the member of a kind of a noble clan. But there's always this question mark about, like, ethically, like, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? And of course, I think the Mandalorian mystique and part of the draw in fandom is often this kind of, wonderfully nebulous kind of quality that bounty hunting in particular has. Mandalorians, of course, are a lot more honor driven than that, like in canon. But I think there's a lot of mystique around like bounty hunter morals and ethics. And what this episode does really nicely is sets us up to know, look, he has done bad things in the past. And we are going to show you what real bad guys look like, just to make sure that we are positioning the Mandalorian as a reformed person who has made questionable past decisions, and is in fact now a man of honor, and is someone who we can trust to bring us forward and to take care of. I'm calling him the Baby Yoda. I don't know if that's a gauche thing on the show or not.
No, it's fine.
I say so with my tongue firmly planted in cheek, but like that is what he will be to me forever. Although Taika Waititi has named him Nigel now. Just came across my timeline, so I guess we could start calling him Nigel. But it's effective, right? To sort of say, look, we're gonna like really show you where the order to the universe is here, or to the order to the galaxy, if you will. And even though this is a person who's doing sort of survival level side jobs, and there's like some gray area, and we're going to, I'm sure delve more into that. We need to make the stakes high enough, and that kind of darkness is a part of making stakes high, to establish our lead characters also being someone who is righteous and who we can kind of trust ourselves with. Complex and complicated, but still fundamentally a good guy.
And to be fair, I think it's fair to say that he's one of the most complicated characters in the history of Star Wars, and just through 8 episodes, which I think is a testament to storytelling. What did you say, Annalise? I'm sorry.
I just think that they've done a brilliant job with that character and with that character development and with the way that storytelling is happening, for sure.
Absolutely. Ryder, you mentioned that you showed this to your son, and you said he was 7.
He was 7 at the time. He turned 8 last week. So yeah.
Did this age him to make him turn 8 earlier?
He's got gray hair now.
Wow, that's very unfortunate.
I don't know. I don't know that he's old enough to understand anything more than the Mandalorian is a good guy protecting Baby Yoda, who he thinks is the cutest thing ever created. Working with some bad guys and then eventually working against the bad guys. I think he sees it more black and white, and he sees, laser blasts and fighting and things like that. And that's good enough for him. He may understand some of the more the complexities of it, but what I love is he can sit down and enjoy this, and I can too, and we enjoy it on different levels, but we enjoy it together. And ever since, he just asked to watch more Mandalorian. Before we started recording, we watched episode 8 together, and he just loves it. And I love that Star Wars does that. And it seems to be very good. I was going to say filmmaking, but episode making that can allow people of all ages to enjoy the same show on different levels and get something different out of it. I mean, he wants a stuffed Baby Yoda, and I want to dress like the Mandalorian when I go to work, and it's just cool stuff like that Star Wars brings everybody together. And on top of that, now he's asking. He hasn't seen The Rise of Skywalker yet. The rest of my family and I have seen it multiple times, but now he's asking, "Can I take him to Star Wars?" And we're going to plan on to see The Rise of Skywalker on Saturday, and we're going to go. And he is super excited about it. And if the Mandalorian got him there, that's good enough.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the meetup and the plan and how they sort of disseminate. They do a couple of things here. There's a lot of peacocking going on. And there is a lot of an establishment character-wise of what these characters are like, what their specialties are, and what makes them tick. And to me, I thought it was clever, and I also thought it was interesting that the Mandalorian, very much like a samurai, I guess, for lack of a better description, sits back, and while he doesn't like, as you said, Ryder, someone invading his personal space, which no one would, he rolls with it, and he's sitting back. Annalise, do you think that he is aware that they're going to at some point turn on him? Or what do you think is happening here with this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we get such deep Ronin vibes, right? Like, I think that's also very purposeful. And of course, Star Wars as a series of stories has a long history of really playing heavily on those kinds of themes. We had a whole actual Seven Samurai episode in The Mandalorian. I think that we're led to believe that this character is not foolish enough to trust anyone. And that's also kind of a huge part of his isolation, that there's a comradeship that happens within the kind of, the clan, or with the tribe within, other Mandalorians, but that, I would not assume at this point that this character would just be comfortably thinking, yes, this team has my back. And that there's a sense of I'm going to look out for myself and my own interests here. So I think he plays it that way, right? I think as the plan is being hatched, you get a sense if he's like, all right, there's 75% of my energy going toward the plan on the table. 25% is in reserve, just watching my back, because who knows what's going to happen with all of y'all.
Absolutely. And Ryder, when there's something set up, what is your opinion of Shi-Young? She is a Twi'lek, as we said. She is a far cry from Harrison Dula. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
They have a history. What did that do for you as a consumer of mass media, as far as how it establishes not only her, but how did it make you look at the Mandalorian any differently?
Well, it didn't make me look at him in a negative way. It made me look at him in a way that it seems that he's made some mistakes in his life and he's turned it around. And she, on the other hand, it doesn't seem like has turned it around. But, I guess I would rather have somebody who has had a little bit of a shady past, who now has this heart of gold and is willing to protect other people that are in his circle, and has a moral compass and a creed and all that, rather than somebody who claims to be good and has been with the good guys the whole time, but would betray you at the first opportunity. So, yeah, she was dropping little hints about things that he has done. It did enough to give me enough. It gave me enough background on him to know that he's done some nefarious things, but it doesn't make me need to dive into his whole history. I don't need like 2 more episodes going back in time and showing me all of that, which some people I think like and need. I just don't need that. I just need little hints of what happened, and let's move forward. He's done these things. We've all done questionable things in our lives, probably. But do you learn from those and move on? I think that's what's most important in life and to the Mandalorian, apparently.
It's also intriguing too that I'm grateful for this opportunity, because it does show that, I mean, he's certainly come from a trauma. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of evidence of that, and we see that he has a past. We all have different things at different degrees that shape who we are. And I think it makes him even more intriguing, which, again, I thought, well, why are we putting this? Is this a gimmick, just having something with a Twi'lek in here? But no, it forms and shapes the direction of this episode. And I think it makes the ending a lot more powerful. So with that, let's take a quick break. And when we return, we will continue talking about The Prisoner. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Rise of the Resistance is now open at Walt Disney World and will be open very, very soon at Disneyland. So you need to be sure and book some experiences to the East and West Coast so you can experience Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, and Rise of the Resistance. And I can think of no better way to do that than through MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Their signature service and expert advice will help clients maximize their vacation time and dollar. Their no-cost, no-obligation quote when you use the service is really wonderful, and they also proactively adjust the booking if the rate goes down. They will help your family enjoy everything Galaxy's Edge and the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines have to offer, help plan every detail, and will share invaluable tips. Be sure to go to our affiliate link, which can be found in the show notes on the front of our webpage or on our social media, and sign up for a free, no-obligation quote. You'll have the best vacation possible and help out Coffee with Kenobi in the process. So be sure to tell them that Dan Z and Coffee with Kenobi sent you. Our Coffee with Kenobi Patreon family continues to grow and flourish, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Jason Hall, Dennis Keithley, Colby Mead, Jessica Berry, Lance Hickerson, Adam Bankhurst, David Nicely, Jeff Ellis, Ross Halliban, Frank Mulder, Alexander Moylan, Aaron Harris, Chris Gavarka, Angela Sauce, Connie Shee, John Sorensen, Hannah, Tyler Pompa, Yancey Evans, Alex Procaccio, Tim Van Swoll, Ian Thompson, Simbat Detradarian, Christine Turk, Sean Reed, Kurt McKellen, Dan Ream, Brian Harding, Blake Weaver, Jim Capron, Caroline Maselli, Chris Metz, LJ Souter, Thea Selby, Daz Davies, Christian Dale, Brian McKinney, Jared Cantor, BJ Smith, Eric Struthers, Nick Deco, and Mark Suter. Thanks to all of you, Coffee with Kenobi is able to grow and flourish in ways we never would have thought possible, and you get something out of it as well. For $5 or more a month, you get access to CWK Pour Over, which is our exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else, hosted by myself, Tom Gross, and Corey Kleber. We talk about Star Wars. We go behind the scenes of what goes on into covering events and producing Coffee with Kenobi and popular culture. We review movies, all kinds of fun stuff, and we have a great time bringing it to you. And for $10 or more a month, you get access to CWK Lens, which gives you a ton of video and photos behind the scenes of what's going on. When I was on Rise of the Resistance, I posted a lot of pictures and images that only you got to see. I didn't put on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else, only for CWK Patreon contributors. If you have any questions or want to find out more about how to support Coffee with Kenobi, be sure to go to www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi and sign up today. Thank you so much. We are back, and Annalise, I'm going to turn to you again, and I want to know what you thought about. There were a couple times in this episode, 2 or 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, where I don't know that we necessarily break the fourth wall, but we come close to that wall and kind of peek in and smile. As Xi'an mocking "This is the way," or Mayfield. I guess he does make a crack about, "Hey, I'm not a stormtrooper." But even more than that, I think the Gungan talk, or referring to Matt Lanter's character as Egghead. How did you feel about that? Did that take you out of the episode a little bit?
It's a good question. It wasn't really breaking the fourth wall, right? Because they were very much within the story. I found it really successful, and that comes from a place of being wary of too much wink, wink, nod, nod. Hey, look at all of these Star Wars references we're packing into a thing. I thought there was a really interesting way, and this is something that actually is what drew me to the Clone Wars animated series, was the way that the things I was used to seeing from the original trilogy, the things that were familiar to me from my own growing up in Star Wars, were suddenly set in this era that was prequel era storytelling, and in a format that I'd never seen, which is animation. And I loved it. I loved seeing Imperial probe droids kind of roaming around various ships. And there was something that felt really congruent about it. And so in this episode, all of those nods, and like I had said earlier, like there's the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and the standalone films all had nods. And of course, the sequel trilogy hasn't happened yet, and so we are clearly not nodding there yet. But we had the Gungan dig. There's what's the alien that Rio Durant is? Whatever Rio is from Solo, the one with the multiple arms. We have like that kind of like, hey, you've seen this particular alien before. He's going to be locked up. I thought that I love any opportunity to make fun of how stormtroopers can't aim, and clearly so does Jon Favreau, because we've had a few of these jokes now, and I'm just like, yeah, work with the crayons you've been given. And I loved Xi'an's little "this is the way," like, I'm going to make fun of you. I think that it actually grounds us back in the universe, which is to say these people are all actually living and just sort of scrapping and working and getting by in the universe that we have all these reference points for. And as audience, we kind of tend to use these reference points as things that are sort of holy or sacred. But what would it be like if you're just living in the world? You're going to poke fun of it. You're going to make jokes. They're going to be your cultural reference points. And so it actually worked for me. It felt really just sort of natural. And I love an Easter egg that basically makes you feel like you're being rewarded if you notice it, but you're not lost if you don't. And I think that they were really successful on that front as well.
I love that take on that. For me, like the I'm not a stormtrooper thing, I thought that was amusing. That didn't really affect me either way. Him mocking the Rebel soldier's helmet, of course that would happen. I guess he's not a rebel anymore. He's in the New Republic. But it's pretty much the same thing. I think what's interesting about her mocking "this is the way," I think what makes that so jarring and so effective from a character point of view is that implies she is very much on the inside of what makes this guy tick, of who he is and what he values. And the fact that she would so brazenly mock such a sacred thing, I guess would be like the equivalent of walking into someone's church or place of worship and mocking one of their sacred traditions. Mm-hmm. So that shows you, wow, this is a person that she's not nice. And and she doesn't have like qualms about going to invading, there are no boundaries. One of the most important things I think we can do as people is establish boundaries and let you know, hey, this is how I'm going to be treated. And the fact that she's not like that makes the end more scary and frightening because you know what she's capable of. Again, a masterful stroke at establishing character. About the only thing I sort of like about was mocking the Gungan. I thought, well, that might, I don't know if that one necessarily worked for me. But like you said, Annalise, I appreciate what they were trying to do with it.
Yeah, there's a sense of like, oh, you've got referential in-universe humor now. And I like getting to see, I mean, if humor is one of the ways that we actually can feel like we are connected to a culture, and we often think about like, you know, when you're multilingual, being able to both joke and understand jokes in languages that are not your first language is a sort of sign of like, oh, okay, good, I'm actually experiencing some fluency now. We don't get to have that in-universe humor quite so often. And those moments felt like they were attempts at in-universe humor, which feels intimate and like a different way of being in the galaxy than perhaps like the trilogy films have invited us. That humor often feels like it's kind of breaking a fourth wall, and that it feels like that humor is just for me, right? Like droid please is just for me. Like that doesn't feel like it's necessarily referencing things in universe. It's just to make me feel delighted. And it works. I'm delighted. But this felt very like I was a fly on the wall watching how folks would be joking with each other. And I love seeing an evil Twi'lek as well, I have to say. Like, we've had a lot of, you know, really good guy Twi'leks, and I might suggest that, like, even Hera's parents and, you know, Cham Syndulla, who is great in the books and then really complicated and not so great in the animation, they're all still kind of revolutionary freedom fighters. And this notion of just, like, the criminal brother and sister, and I think it was, you know, I think it was played over the top on purpose. Natalia Tena is a fabulous actor. You know, she's Tonks in the Harry Potter films, and I love that actor. But there is something liberating about a good villain. And Star Wars has always done villains really well. And I really like this particular form of scoundrel who is also a bad guy. I like that we get to, well, we'll get to the end of it, but I like the fact that we have the possibility of getting to have, if not more of them, more of something like them. And I think about her interaction with the Mandalorian around, there's that whole, well, do you remember the sort of whatever horrible deed they did on Alzak 3? And Ryder, this is getting to your point of, I don't need an episode about this. They actually totally took care of it in just this little exchange of him sort of somberly saying, I did what I had to do, and her sort of like taunting and hissing, oh, but you liked it. And I just love that play, right? Where she clearly knows a lot about him. She's willing to use what she knows against him. And she's tipping us off at this audience that there was a time in this character's life when he behaved in a very different way than what we've gotten to see.
Right, which adds some richness and depth that is certainly going to hopefully feed us for years and years in the Star Wars universe. Let's talk about the first really kind of blockbuster action sequence. You mentioned earlier, Annalise, we haven't really seen, I mean, we've seen him, of course, take care of business repeatedly, especially in the third episode when he rescues the child. But this is a little bit different. And the way it's filmed and shot, Ryder, it reminded me very much of something like Aliens. The way the lighting was, especially more towards the end, but when he first walks around and takes on those New Republic droids that are security droids, the way he takes them out and the way they basically are just eating popcorn, watching it happen. What a glorious sequence.
I loved it. And, you know, they're kind of condescendingly making fun of him. And, you know, I thought he was, you know, acting like he's, you know, so tough and everything. And then he comes around and he takes out the droids, and I just wanted to say, that's what you guys get. You've been making fun of my boy, the Mandalorian, and look how cool he is. Look how tough he is. He just saved you guys. And then Mayfield, right along with his character, gets up and says, now clean up your mess. You know, it's just like, God, this guy can't catch a break with these clowns. And I really love that sequence. And what I liked about it is he didn't go in and just like beat them all down effortlessly. He had to work for it a little bit. He got hit too. But he kept fighting, and he ended up cleaning them up, and or not cleaning them up, but taking them out and saving the day for the first time, and not for the last time. But I thought that scene was great, and with all the corridors, it did have a little bit of an alien feel to it. You're right.
Well, and what else is cool about that too is being a father of two teenage boys. Of course, they're like completely opposite of how these they behave. But the again, I keep referring to peacocking, but the way after he does that display where he just completely makes short work of them and does it artfully and not necessarily effortlessly, but there's some effort there. But he takes care of business, and then he just stands up and looks at him like, "What now, boys?" And they walk by, and Berg particularly, you know, does the classic bully shoulder bump. You know, like, I'm still tougher than you kind of a thing. I thought, Annalise, that really spoke to me, just because, not that I would behave that way, but more of a like, okay, these guys are threatened by him, but they are never going to admit that. The testosterone is at an all-time high here.
Yeah. Well, and too, that like they have their strong man, right? Like Berg has clearly got the muscle. We see a little later on in the episode how much muscle he's got.
Yeah.
Mayfeld clearly has some kind of strategy, but then the Mando is there with this like perfect combination of like strategy. He's quiet, so you don't actually know how much is in there, and clearly takes care of business in a way that they, as a group, are not as able to. And again, he really gets to play that one out. And there's a lot of Chekhov's gun going on in this episode as well, right? Where this episode routinely sets you up and shows you a thing and then uses the thing. And I love that in my like genre storytelling in particular, right? Like, don't suggest to me that this guy is like silent and has mad skills if you're not going to also then show me the mad skills.
Right.
Like, don't show me the tracking beacon if that thing is not going to show up in the third act in some way that's really satisfying to me. And like beat for beat, this episode does so much of that.
I love it.
Yeah, that kind of like posturing as well, where I'm just like, oh, y'all are going to meet a bad end. Like, I see what you're kind of like setting yourself up for here.
Isn't it wonderful how this is working out? The Force was definitely with me when I got you two on this. Oh man, I could just sit back and listen to the two of you talk about it. So we see the face off with the human guard, the Lantern character in the credits. It doesn't even give him a name, although I think they released it online. But that interplay, we pretty much have talked about this. Was there anything else that either of you want to say about that moment? I think again it shows that the Mandalorian does have compassion and does have empathy, which I think is paramount to what kind of character he is. He's not squeaky clean, and how they've handled this episode or this moment before the first episode of season 1, I don't know. It might have been a little bit different. I'm not sure that it would be that much different, but maybe it would. But is there anything you want to talk about that before we move on to the end of this?
Well, what I liked is earlier in the season, the Mandalorian had been in that position himself with the client and the client's stormtroopers. And, he had both his weapons drawn, pointed at the stormtroopers and said he liked those odds. And so he could probably know just how scared this young Republic guard was. And he wanted to tell him that, you don't need to die. Just, let us go about our business and you can get out of here alive. And he it felt like he was kind of communicating that to the other four, like, let's just, let's let him go. We'll get our business done. Nobody has to die and we can all leave happy. So yeah, empathy is probably what the Mandalorian had in this situation.
I will say, for me, the biggest, there's so much character development going on, but there was also this, for me, significant piece of world building happening in this episode with the fact that this is the first we've seen of the New Republic in this era, actually, right? Like, this is the first live action New Republic we get before the sequel trilogy, and arguably is the most established sort of shot of it, because we're not even really functioning in the New Republic in the sequel trilogy films. And as a psychologist who's worked in prisons and worked with formerly incarcerated people, it was really significant to me that the first thing we see of the New Republic is a prison barge, and that the first droids we see with rebel emblems on them are these actually kind of scary, like, prison guard, like CO droids that are, they don't feel like the good guy droids, right? Although this is a good guy ship, like it's that kind of, I love the moral complexity of being reminded that while the Mandalorian is our hero and he is our good guy, and we are seeing he clearly has empathy and a code and the capacity to really care for and protect others, he's also come from a very complex background where he's clearly caused harm. He's working with a group of people whose motivations are perhaps more survival based than anything else. And the first real look we have of this new government that we actually overthrew Empire for is a prison ship. And I always think that the way that we depict prison in genre, in fantasy and imagination actually does speak a lot to us culturally in terms of how we regard issues of good and evil and who has what kind of a place in society. A lot of our unconscious bias and stereotypes around prisons come from media representations of them. And this notion of people being in kind of odd, sterile cells with no plumbing on a ship in the middle of space with one other human who's not locked up on it is a provocative piece of world building for me. And so while I know better than to ever take anything in Star Wars literally, like I have a lot more fun with Star Wars because I don't take things really literally, right? This is a fantasy franchise. We are not supposed to be, it's not a documentary. It's a fantasy franchise. I was really like, this is an interesting first glimpse at the government that overthrew the empire. And I, very possibly because of my own background as well, was like, I'm noting this. This is an interesting way to be introduced to the first place I'm seeing a rebel insignia that's not Cara Dune's face tattoo, is actually, on these CO droids and on the lone person manning the prison ship.
I love that too. And thank you for bringing up your background. And real quickly, before we move on to the end of this, did you feel like the interplay between the four of these characters was grounded in some sort of reality as far as how inmates might react to one another?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I think that they're significantly broader strokes, and that's what needs to happen because it's storytelling.
Yes.
And so I think that they operated very clearly on the level of trope. But in a way that we can easily recognize and digest because this is what we want for storytelling. And this is one of the things I love about Star Wars. And also for me, what makes Star Wars different than, for instance, like Star Trek, another franchise that I love, where Star Trek is, I think, being much more deliberate in its allegory. It's being much more deliberate in its, like, we are telling you stories now that are, and it's supposed to be instructive and help build future. Star Wars is historicism, it's fairy tale, it's Western, it's looking back, and it is really about it's myth. Where can we give you the grand character that you can tap into and either find yourself or exercise the parts of yourself that you're not allowed to be. And so, I don't look to it for those more realistic portrayals because I don't actually think that's what it's designed for. And that's good.
Totally agree. Very, very well said. I've had a number of people ask me that particular question, and I love how you said that. Yeah, I think it's important that, the broad strokes, the tropes, what myth does, and what I tell my students all the time is that what myth does is it takes these ideas and allows us to talk about them, very, very complex issues, in much more digestible ways where we can really get to the nitty gritty of what's important. And I think this episode does this really, really beautifully. We meet Quinn, who is the MacGuffin to a degree for this episode because that is why they are there. We find out he is the brother of Shi-Young, and he is not necessarily a character you want to bring home to your parents either. I think what's interesting about Quinn is that he has no problem at all completely turning on his sister. And after she's gone through as much as she has done, which does something quite powerful, Ryder, it actually had me feel a bit of sympathy for Shi-Young, which at the beginning of this episode I never thought would have been possible.
Yep, I totally agree because, like I said, a lot of these characters got under my skin. And then when your own brother turns on you, I think, well, that's kind of awful even for a bad person because you hope that at least your family has your back. But he tells Mayfield, you get me off this ship and whatever, you get a triple reward or something like that. And even Mayfield says, what about your sister? I mean, even he's thinking of the sister first. Quinn's like, well, whatever. She's not getting out by herself. Well, she's not getting out, I guess. And then, you see the Mandalorian sneaking up on her. Was it on her and Mayfield in the dark? And I just thought, oh, now I feel bad for these people because it turned into a horror movie for about 30 seconds there. And I thought, oh man, now I feel bad. So
it's so true. It's so
and
true.
then also like those deep Nostromo vibes, right? Like I do think that I love this notion of like the language of it being a horror film. I timed it the second watch, and from the moment that the beacon gets beeped and Mayfield says, okay, we've got 20 minutes. That's actually 20 minutes that's left in the episode. So they real time the remainder of the episode, which I always love. I think that's a really kind of great way to build pressure. But yeah, like this sort of like, okay, we're going to get the MacGuffin, and then we're quickly going to establish that now it is a free for all, and that there is no allegiance between any of these people, and the person we're actually rooting to get off the ship alive is the one who's arguably the most capable, right? Like, this is Mandalorian competency is what this episode is really all about. And like, when they shove him in the cell, and there's that sense of like, how is he going to get out of the cell? And then he's not worried about it. Clearly he has this extremely effective way of getting out of the cell. Like, everything that follows from that is just like so satisfying. But it's easier for it to be satisfying because there's no part of us that's rooting for these bad guys at this point. Right. The bad guys have all shown us that they would sell each other out at the drop of a hat. So there's no lingering goodness in them. And even then, you know, we don't have to worry about them all meeting bloody and horrible demises because our hero is a more ethical guy than that.
Very true. Very, very true. So the end of this, I mean, obviously there's this great action sequence at the end where he systematically takes down each member of the party. And it's a little bit different than when he takes on those droids before, who I agree, and at least are scary kind of in their own right, even though they're not supposed to be. But that's where we kind of get close to like, it almost makes it seem like the New Republic is borderline a police state, which, you know, it'll be interesting to have that explored as well. Now that we've seen the rise of Skywalker, it'll be interesting to see how much that portrays or leads to the First Order rising, as far as that paranoia or propaganda. Lots to digest there. But I think the biggest takeaway from this is that, and I've mentioned this multiple times throughout the years too, but in this culture where we had this myth of redemptive violence, the Mandalorian, who is more than capable of taking life and clearly has done so many times, we've seen it happen, does not kill these despicable criminals. And I guess you could argue that and from his point of view, from his perspective, he doesn't. But with honor, with integrity, and I guess you could even say with justice, he doesn't kill. I found that so shocking and so refreshing in a way I didn't expect. I thought it was a master stroke, Annalise.
I loved it. I loved his whole, I did what I had to do. Right. Like I love again, this is editing and direction and like the speed of those final scenes. Ludwig Göransson's like amazing score, all the tension, that strobe lighting effect where you kind of see him sneaking up on, the, you know, next folks he's going to get. It had deep Nostromo vibes, except he was the alien, right? Kind of tracking everyone down. But that for as frightening a predator as he was in clearing the game board so that he would be able to assure his own escape, he also did the thing that was arguably harder, right, and more dangerous to him, which was getting these folks alive and you know, basically sort of detained in a way that gave him a clear getaway. And I love that storytelling decision. I have no doubt, and certainly we get to see the places where faceless people get killed in large numbers. That is again, part of this particular kind of genre storytelling. When we've taken an entire episode to get to know characters, and then there's a conscientious decision to not kill them. And then again, on a genre storytelling level, you have left open this possibility because we had a standalone, let's develop character and have an adventure episode for one or more of these characters to come back around. Which is great. You spent some time and energy establishing a good meanie. Let's not squander that. I could use that meanie maybe down the road. And certainly, in the animation, we've had nice examples of that. Star Trek and, I think of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm just thinking about like all the kind of like genre related series that are just like, by all means, spare your big bad so they can come back in a couple seasons and be awesome again. And so, yeah, both on that kind of, what are you role modeling to me level and on the storytelling level, it totally worked.
I would just want to take a moment and say that Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if it's not my favorite TV show of all time, it's my second favorite TV show of all time.
What's your first?
It might be Seinfeld. Which isn't important at all, but boy, did it make me laugh for years.
That's right. It's a genre, no, but yes, great.
Exactly. Yeah, no, Buffy's about as good as it gets. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I think one quick thing I want to say before we wrap this up, because Annalise, I want to talk to you about your incredible series. I want to ask, why does he spare these 4 criminals, but not the guy that hires him or Quinn? Ryder, what do you think?
It's a good question. I was thinking, why did he spare him? Well, I think, your integrity, you can lose that awful quick. Nobody was going to see him kill these people. There's no questions asked by Rand, so no one's going to know whether or not he killed these people. But he has to live with himself. He's got to know if he killed those people or not. And so that's what made me think of the reason he didn't kill them. Why he lets the others get killed is because I think they were the masterminds of this, and they directed these other 4. Maybe he knows something about Xi'an, that she could be redeemed somehow, but Quinn and Rand, they have no redeeming qualities at all. They're out there, pushing people to do bad things. Maybe these others come back into play, like Annalise said, and maybe they become an ally of some kind. Maybe they become another, just a bad guy for him to fight against. But I'm not smart enough to know why he didn't kill these other 3, and why he did kill the 2. I'm not sure. I have no idea. But maybe it was just to get Dave Filoni in the episode. I'm not sure.
That makes as much sense as anything.
I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Really?
Payoff there.
I actually have something to say about that Dave side of things, but I'll get to that in a second. Annalise, what do you think?
I mean, I think first, getting too micro about why anyone does anything in a Star Wars is the path of madness. So it is always nice to hold motivation and plot lightly in all of this kind of storytelling. And then having said that, I'd like to think, maybe my own reading into it is that if he doesn't have to, he's going to try to avoid killing folks. Like, he's not someone who just kills folks casually. And that also he could see the path to getting off of the prison ship without needing to kill anyone. But that, I'd like to think, and this gets to your point earlier, Dan, about like, did he know these folks were going to turn on him? I'd like to think he went back to Rand with Quinn and was like, what I need from you is my pay, right? Like, I'm a single father and I need to get paid for this gig.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to let me off of this ship alive. And so he was, in a sense, kind of guaranteeing his exit, knowing that like he could leave the 4 who were maybe not the masterminds on the ship locked up, and that might bite him in the ass later or might not, but that he wasn't going to get away from Rand without there being some sort of consequence. So that was never, Rand's intention was never to let him actually just get away. And so that's my, I think, little headcanon around it. But I agree that I think it might have mostly been just so that we could then get the thing I didn't realize I needed in Star Wars, but that I needed more than anything else, which is Deborah Chow in an X-Wing. And no matter what the reasoning was, if all of that culminated in Deborah Chow in a X-Wing, I feel like it was a really strong storytelling point and critical to do.
That's good enough for me.
I like that as well. Yeah, and plus, I think there was more of a threat of something coming back to harm. I don't get the sense that Berg or Mayfield are going to go hunt him down. I mean, surely their paths will cross later, but I don't feel like the same could be said of the 2 that met their fate when they did. I think so. I don't know if I talked about this on the regular show or not, but at the premiere to The Rise of Skywalker, I spent about 10 minutes talking to Dave about that X-Wing appearance, and he was great. He was funny. He was super casual about it. Talked about sort of how they got the 3 of them to do that. I think it just was sort of a fun lark. I think the other 2 were like, oh, I don't know if we want to do this. Dave was a little reluctant to do it, but then they just had fun with it and went for it. And boy, what a great cameo that was between all 3 of them. It was just how cool that they're doing this. I mean, what Star Wars has done, what Disney has done with the Star Wars franchise, is I think it's injected a little bit of adrenaline at times, shock at times, but it's really made for some fun moments for us as fans.
Yeah, totally agree. I think The Mandalorian feels like it's very talented Star Wars fans making Star Wars shows, and they like to throw little Easter eggs things in and, callbacks to other shows, but it's fun. Our lives don't depend on it like the theatrical movies do. These are just fun. If there's a bad episode, who cares? If there's a bad character, who cares? If Dave Filoni and mediocre acting in an X-Wing is going to make me laugh, put it in there. I don't care. It's just awesome and it's fun, and that's what Star Wars should be. And I think that's what The Mandalorian has reminded us of, that Star Wars should be fun, and it has been a lot of fun.
The other thing I love about that particular setup was that for those of us that have been eagerly watching this series because we care very much about who's getting to make these films and these television shows, and certainly there's a lot of conversation among media makers right now around who gets to tell the story. I love Dave Filoni as a storyteller. I love listening to him talk about character and story and the process of bringing the shows that he's EP'd or created together. But I'm particularly in love with who they've hired to helm these episodes. And so I know for myself as a filmmaker, it feels amazing to get to have that little Easter egg scene, which again, if you don't know who those folks are, you're fine. And you still know that the New Republic showed up and blew a bunch of stuff up again. We're saying some things about how the New Republic functions, and so I'm just putting a pin in that for world building. But then also, if you're a person who's been sort of hanging on every announcement of every person who gets to put their hands on a Star Wars and make one and play in that box, to see Rick Famuyiwa and to see Deborah Chow show up in that scene is really revolutionary, and it felt great. I was punching the air and being yeah, get him, because it just feels wonderful to see that. And when we see underrepresented and marginalized media makers not only get to helm things, but then get to show up in the Easter egg cameo in the X-Wing helmet, it feels kind of like a win for all of us.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of a win for all of us, there is this amazing docuseries called Looking for Leia, and I have it on good authority, Dr. Annalise Ophelian, that you are the mastermind behind this. Of course you are. We all know this. We are so excited for you bringing this incredible story to Star Wars fans, to the world. Talk to us about where we are at with this incredible series and how you're feeling these days about this.
Thank you so much. Well, you had me on the show 2 years ago now. I feel like a lot of independently produced media, we worked on this for almost 3 years. It was 2.5 years in total. I like to say we did pop culture documentary at an independent film pace, which is never the way you really want to do it. But I am incredibly thrilled to say that that all 7 episodes of Looking for Leia are now available to view, right now, through Sci-Fi Wire, who have picked the series up. You can watch it on Sci-Fi Wire, Sci-Fi VOD, the NBC One app, throughout all of their whole kind of ecosystem. They're a fantastic home and have been a really great space. We premiered on December 21st, so we're still a brand new, fresh release. It's 7 episodes, 12 to 15 minutes each, looking at various aspects of fandom from the perspective of women and non-binary fans, talking about the ways that we take the stories in the galaxy far, far away that we love, and then through our own passion and joy and engagement, turn them into things that are entirely new. So it feels wonderful after so long talking about the project and building the project to now actually have it out in the world where folks can watch it and engage with it.
And what a thrill. Probably, I'm sure when you first got the news of how this is going to be distributed, it must have been thrilling and a little bit frightening, but in the best way possible, because this passion project has become so much more. It's released. It's wonderful. I can't even tell you how much I'm just so drawn to it. It's just, and a lot of it is because of your spirit, of your passion, of your art, and the fact that you're empowering these incredible people to tell their stories.
It feels like, Sci-Fi is an amazing home. And I do feel, with all distribution, there's a lot of great media that's made in the world that does not get picked up. And so it feels amazing to have not only found a distributor, found someone who wanted to acquire us and share us, but to have had that home base be with Sci-Fi, who have I think a really fan-centered, fan-forward agenda, and really mirrored the sort of central thesis of the project, which is that we take fandom seriously, right? Like, not morbidly seriously, but we look at it as a valid subject of inquiry. And I think fandom docs have historically poked a bit of fun at fandom or treated fandom as something trivial or light. I spent almost 2 years on the road talking with women and also non-binary fans about their Star Wars fandom. And can assure you that, like, of the over 100 people I talked to on camera, even more that weren't on camera, there was nothing frivolous about the way that people connect to these stories and love these stories and the role it plays in their lives and the way that they utilize these stories for self-care, for connection, to build family. And so it felt really wonderful to be paired with a broadcaster that took it as seriously as we did, and that just like immediately got the project, and was just like, yes, this is it. These are all the things that we too believe in about genre storytelling and fandom and the interaction and ways that fandom functions in the world. And of course, at this point, I think a lot of us grew up with geekdom being very on the outside and very otherized. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the geeks have inherited the earth. Fandom is very much the sort of mainstream way of, I think, being in the world in a lot of ways. It's a shared cultural language. And so it feels really special to have created something, and also something that does, you know, there's plenty of places for critique, and critical analysis, I think, is a necessary part of media consumption. We aren't doing media analysis in Looking for Leia. We're really talking about participatory fandom, about the ways that people's fandom shows up in their lives. And that's just joyous, right? Like, that's actually getting to just focus on the things that give people a sense of connection to themselves and to others. And we don't hear enough of those stories, and it felt really special to be able to bring them to air.
Amen to that. And you tapped onto something that I think is important to this docuseries, is that you are portraying people who are fans, and it's not trivialized. It's not shown with like one eye. You know, I don't know how many documentaries I've seen where they show fans, and I get the sense that the filmmakers don't truly respect what's going on with the people who they are portraying. And in this, you're telling their stories and embracing how wonderful they are as people, as passionate fans, giving them a voice. And I think that's one thing I've always been so interested in since we started this podcast. I think that is the kind of thing that helps to lift us up as people, as a culture, as a country, as a world, where we can celebrate people and celebrate everything that makes us who we are. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the support that you and the podcast and everybody out in kind of podcastlandia and on social media has shown to us over the years. It really was the fuel in the tank to help us keep going.
Well, it certainly shows. And I know you just mentioned where everybody can see that, but you also, of course, have a social media component as well. Please let us know about that.
We do. So folks can follow along with us on Twitter at Looking for Leia. We are a good time on Twitter. If you have the chance to watch the series and want to share your thoughts, hit us up on Twitter or hashtag Looking for Leia as well. The website is lookingforleia.com, but really Sci-Fi Wire is where you're going to find the actual episodes. And so those are the places. There's a link off of our Twitter page to get there as well. Facebook.com/Looking for Leia. And we're Looking for Leia series on Instagram.
And of course, you have a wonderful Twitter account as well.
Yes, you can check out things like Chihuahuas and the most recent thoughts I've had on pop culture. I feel like my Twitter page is like mental health, Chihuahuas, and pop culture. You can link to me off of the Looking for Leia page, but if you have show notes, it's at Dr. Ophelian, which is impossible to spell, and there's an underscore, so you can connect with me through the Looking for Leia Twitter, because I've made it impossible to find me on Twitter otherwise.
I love it. Well, I can't recommend Looking for Leia enough. It's wonderful, as are you. And speaking of wonderful writers, it's always great to have you on. I feel like I owe you an apology, Ryder, because we always have you on right before a new Star Wars movie. I'm sure you noticed that didn't happen for The Rise of Skywalker. And it wasn't because we don't think you're the best. It's just because things got a little crazy.
I completely understand.
Like that. So we have you on now, so I think we've righted the ship.
This totally makes it it was a chaotic week. You had a lot going on, and so did I. It's totally fine. And I got to be on tonight with you and Annalise, whose passion is like coming through my computer right now, and I love it.
I'm making Baby Yoda force fingers at you, Ryder. Just so that's what it feels like.
I mean, like I'm like getting like emotional just listening because I love people who are passionate about anything, Chihuahuas or looking for Leia. I don't care, just as long as they're passionate and love stuff. And it's awesome what you're doing, and I think this was a great week to be on.
Well, I'm so
I appreciate
glad.
it.
Well, tell us about Idiot's Array and everything you've got going on.
Yeah, so you can find Idiot's Array pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts. We are at Idiot's Array Pod on Twitter, and we've gone weekly the last 6 weeks or so to cover all the Mandalorian episodes. Now we'll go back to our every 2 weeks schedule, and you can follow me on Twitter at Ryder Waldron DDS. And I just had, I wouldn't call it an article, but a piece come out in Dental Town magazine. I think it was titled Star Wars Quotes for Dentists. So I didn't work on it for years like Annalise did. I put like 2 weeks into it. And, but it's, if you want to check it out, you can go find it online somewhere or in a printed copy of Dental Town magazine.
I'm sure everybody. Until my subscription comes.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody has a subscription to that. So, yeah.
I think it's great. And I love that you are waving the flag. And again, another we try to have on positive voices in fandom. I think that's what needs to be spotlighted. That's what needs to be emphasized. And no one does it quite like the two of you. So thank you both so much for being back on Coffee with Kenobi.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was so great being here with you tonight and also with you, Ryder.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are the podcast you're looking for. This is
As we close out the show, I want to thank our CWK sponsors, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel and One Nation Coffee. Please support them the way they support our podcast. And remember to listen to new and archive shows of Coffee with Kenobi wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, CastBox, Deezer, and our website, www.coffeewithkenobi.com, or wherever you enjoy listening to your favorite shows. And if you listen to the show through iTunes, please leave us a review. You can also find us on social media. In fact, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, give us a like on Facebook, and check us out on Pinterest. Be sure to listen to our CWK family of shows too, including Legends Library, Resistance Reactions, Comics with Kenobi, and Lattes with Leia. Please leave a review for each of their shows as well, and be sure to subscribe to each of them individually on their own respective feeds. In addition to the places I just mentioned for Coffee with Kenobi, you can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, as well as on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR, and you can find my writing on CWK's website, as well as StarWars.com and IGN. Don't forget to check out www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi to support our podcast and help us keep the lights on in the studios. Our Patreon page is where you can listen to our exclusive weekly podcast, CWK Pour Over, hosted by me, CWK newsman Tom Gross, and Coffee with Kenobi co-founder Corey Club for just $5 a month. There are also opportunities for behind-the-scenes videos, photos, t-shirts, and more. Plus, 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to St. Jude Children's Hospital each month. Thank you to all of you currently supporting us on Patreon, and thank you for considering becoming a member of our Coffee with Kenobi Patreon family. I want to thank Dr. Annalise Ophelian and Ryder Waldron for coming on and talking about this episode of The Mandalorian. Thanks to everybody for your patience as we slowly get to reviewing the end of this incredible first season of The Mandalorian. As you know, with the travel on both coasts, covering the red carpet event of The Rise of Skywalker, and of course that incredible movie, plus making sure that my students were able to get the spotlight. We have had a lot of exciting things going on in the world of Coffee with Kenobi, and I honestly wouldn't have it any other way. There's so much more coming your way with our live events, with more coverage of The Mandalorian. We have so much more with The Rise of Skywalker. I also want to thank everybody for their encouragement and support of danzmedia.com. I launched it on January 1st, 2020. This is the place to go if you are starting a podcast or a blog and would like some suggestions or pointers to help you along your way, or if you have your brand and you want to take it to the next level, be sure to reach out to me and we can set up something up, because I think that's important, that we continue to build each other up in this community. There are a lot of incredibly talented and intelligent Star Wars fans who have a voice. We want to be sure to help you not only have that here on Coffee with Kenobi, but if you decided, you know what, I want to branch out, I feel inspired, whether it's by Coffee with Kenobi or another one of your favorite podcasts, this is one way that I can help you to make your dreams and your vision come true. And in addition, if you or someone you know is looking for guest speakers, you can also go to danzmedia.com and fill out the contact form. I would love to come to your school, to your place of business, to your conference, and share some of my thoughts on how to help make an impact that is fully 100% who you are. I think there's a lot of potential there in each and every one of you. Be sure to go to danzmedia.com to check out more about that. Again, be sure to stay tuned as we continue to look at The Rise of Skywalker, talk about episodes 7 and 8 of the first season of The Mandalorian, and so much more. Have a wonderful week and weekend, everybody. We will see you next time. Until then, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.